This is a football, one of the biggest sports in the world. Thousands of international players, millions of fans and billions in merchandise. But this is all that we can see. This is the only part of football that we have ever known. Behind these happy faces of thousands of players and fans, there are quite different pictures.
Laser served on the executive committee of football's governing body FIFA, but in 2011 he was arrested by the FBI in the United States.
There are huge problems with the football, problems that are now simmering to the surface. Problems that may eventually be the death of sport itself. You probably grew up watching football, playing it on the field after school. There was just something very appealing about the idea of becoming a new Messi or Ronaldo. But for a few, the idea of becoming a new football star wasn't just an allure, it was a deep-seated passion. Here are three children: Nathaniel, Andrew, and Lamar. They love football and are fascinated with it, shaped by the idea of one day becoming one of the legends they've seen on their worn-out television screens. Each one of them is brimming with the plans and ambitions for the future, but even for them, a dream is all it ever will be. If you want to understand why football is dying, you need to understand three stories of these kids. Nathaniel lives in N'Djamena, at the heart of the Czech Republic. Even in his worn-out town, he and his friends still find the time to play football every day after school. These boys here know their way around a ball and are very competitive, always pushing each other to the limit. Nathaniel in particular spends most of his free time with the ball, improving his free kicks, dribbling and doing everything he could do to make it to the big leagues. He plays every local match in the area, but it's unlikely that he will ever be able to play anything beyond that.
In the news today, the Court of Arbitration for Sports ruled in 16-page judgment that the Football Association in Cameroon is an illegal body.
But because of his love for the sport, he takes this gamble. So he tried to find coaches that had connections to the National Football Association or the NFA.
Corruption in the NFA.
Yes.
What was it like in your time?
It was really bad, but it's even worse now.
These are the big associations that exist in almost every country of the world, and they have one job: to scout for talent and maintain their national teams. And football associations are essentially the institutions that make sure that people get everything they need to be able to play football at the best possible level. Every country has one, and the strongest connection to the largest football corporation in the world is FIFA. But unfortunately, these institutions in places like third world countries aren't top priority. There is no way for them to arrange for coaches, and the referees required to train local talent to play professionally or even friendly matches. And it was a shame that with all his efforts, Nathaniel was never going to be able to try out for the biggest team in the country. Why? Because the institution couldn't afford to build a pitch and hire some coaches? Well, not exactly. Football associations are a big deal in most countries, but in Chad, this was hardly the case.
On n'a pas une école de foot digne de ce nom. J'ai joué au quartier avec les amis.
Nonetheless, FIFA tries to give every country an equal footing in sport. So instead of appointing coaches or playing the development of infrastructure themselves, they will issue funds to the football associations. This means that all of these responsibilities are now delegated to the administrators of the Football Association, who act as liaisons. The only problem is that there is no accountability in these institutions.
The head of African soccer has been banned from the sport for 5 years following a FIFA ethics investigation.
There is no one to dictate the rules or check up on the progress. The system is meant to hold itself accountable. The money channels in, but it's anyone's guess where it will go.
Where did it go?
Don't interrupt it. Let the member of parliament go.
Can you tell us where the $10 million went, Jack? Mr. Warner, where did the $10 million go to?
Please stand aside, please.
Can you tell us one project, Mr. Warner? Can you tell us about one project that you spent the money on?
And inevitably it ends up in the pockets of the corrupt officials required to maintain it. And perhaps one of the most notable examples of the corruption was the case of Adamu. He was a sport executive of Nigeria, one of the sole administrator of the country's football association.
Yeah, I did.
What did you find in his administration?
He's one of the key problems. One of the guys that killed the game.
In the wake of the election to determine which country will host 2022 World Cup, Adamu would go on to make millions in bribes, millions that would otherwise have improved local game, talent and infrastructure. And here is the deal, Adamu is a big name in African football because he is the president of CAF, essentially the Confederation of all African football associations. And this makes him one of the most powerful people in all football. He is, after all, the sole representative of the interest of an entire continent. The choices he made defined the fate of millions of children, looking to make it into the big leagues, children like Nathaniel. And in December of 2010, a group of Qatari delegates met with Amos and two other African football executives to gather support for their bid. Qatar desperately needs to host the next World Cup, and to do that it would need all the support it could get. And Amos was the perfect man to have on their side. With his power and connection, he could effectively convince other World Cup voting committee members to vote in favor of Qatar. The Qatari delegates offered him 1.5 million to reinvigorate football in small African countries. This meant adding grass, pitches, pavilions, clubhouses, changing rooms and footlights and other stuff like that. But surprisingly, or not surprisingly, none of that actually happened. Adamu used up that money to finance his own interest and assets all over the world.
$10 million sent to accounts controlled by Jack Warner, money used for cash withdrawals, credit card payments and alleged money laundering schemes.
Eventually, though, his embezzlement charges caught up to him, and the FIFA Ethics Committee held an inquiry.
The punishment is much more severe for the Nigerian Mr. Adamu, who's been suspended for 3 years and a fine of 10,000 Swiss francs.
While the money was never recovered, Amos lost his position as a powerful football representative. But I suppose it matters little in the face of the potential talent he sent down the drain. And you know, this is hardly the first time a powerful thief has redirected cash flow into his own pockets.
Have you ever tried to buy votes?
I never intended to do so all my life.
Did you ever give any money to those officials in the Caribbean?
No, I didn't know.
Greed has been humans' oldest weakness and has now been taken up by members of the Football Confederation. In 2015, FIFA released a 2.5 million grant to Nigeria as a part of its FIFA assistance program. The money was to be dedicated to football development programs in the country, but it came to the light that these funds were being fraudulently expended. And similarly, in 2019, the president of the Kenya Football Federation, Nick Mwendwa, was accused of embezzling funds meant for football development in Kenya. And everywhere, it's the same story. Power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. This is why they can never improve facilities for football and other sports in the local communities of these countries. And this is exactly why people and kids like Nathaniel may never be able to play and showcase their talent. This is Andrew. He has the privilege of getting into a football club and can play internationally, and he's a little luckier than Nathaniel. But instead of selfish executives, he has to face off against a more pernicious white-collar threat: the transfer system.
Transfer market, I think, is a jungle. I always say, is a jungle. Everything can happen, every single day.
The transfer system exists to give rights to players and defend their interests. It's meant to ensure the contractual stability of footballers and reduces the risk of exploitation. And it's supposed to give them an avenue to expand their career. To carry out of the contractual obligation, they have transfer agents.
We're happy to help them and advise them in their negotiations. So whether that be in the transfer fee, whether it be personal terms, etc.
And you might have heard of these guys. These agents are the heart of the transfer market, and they represent both clubs and players in full capacity during contract negotiations.
Is it people like you more and more saying to these players, look, hold on, don't sign a new contract at your club because I can get you a much better deal and we can share that?
And of course, agents, unsurprisingly, are better at understanding complicated financial policies and negotiating better deals than football players. So it becomes crucial for players to have someone to protect themselves from clubs that might take advantage of their new position on the team. Dominant agents in the market earn considerable amount of money representing players personally for 5 to 10 cut of their earnings. For example, the most well-known agent, George Mendes, represents stars like Cristiano Ronaldo, James Rodriguez, Angel Di Mario and Diego Costa, making him one of the biggest names in the transfer agency.
Conflicts of interest. But why? Listen, but the FIFA, UEFA, they are not police.
But why would the negotiators make deliberately bad decisions for their clients? It turns out that while they advocate for players' rights, they also trap them in echo chambers.
Zlatan doesn't need money. Zlatan needs emotions. He needs objectives. He needs targets to win for.
With a market as lucrative as football, you can naturally assume that something will be under the surface. And this system is never as clean as it's portrayed, and these agents aren't exactly squeaky clean. And the heart of the transfer system is the payment of commission fees to agent on transfer of a player. And wherever copious amounts of money are involved, the trouble is sure to follow. For instance, in 2019, it was reported that agent Mino Raiola had earned a fee of 41 million for negotiating the transfer of Matthias de Ligt from Ajax to Juventus. And I think that 41 million pounds for a transfer is overkill. But what makes the deal truly worrisome is the fact that these representatives are essentially free agents, means there is no one to call them out on misconduct.
Zlatan Ibrahimovic go to a league who is not that good as the Italian.
Something like go fuck yourself?
Let's face it, these agents often have a financial interest in transferring more players and for larger sums of money, even if doing this is detrimental to the financial health of the club or sometimes even the player themselves. There have been cases where agents have been accused of prioritizing their own financial gain over the best interests of the players they represent. In 2020, agent George Mendes negotiated a new contract for his client, a football club, Wolverhampton Wanderers, and its player Ruben Neves. But the only one problem was that he did it without the player's knowledge or consent, claiming afterward that it was the best deal he could have gotten. And this football player, Ruben, wasn't satisfied and struggled to fit in, affecting his ability to perform at his best on the field. And the agent, George Mendes, abused his status in the transfer agency to make a profit. And mind you, this is one of the biggest agents in football and handles players like Ronaldo. These agents are holding their clients hostage and the transfer sum is their ransom. So agents surely are not helping to make football more transparent, fair and better. They are incentivized to play dirty games under the cover, and it adds even more oil to the fire. Now, how the transfer system works?
It's a bit of a game. It's a bit of cat and mouse, these negotiations. So if all of a sudden Mbappe signs a pre-contract, the game's over for him.
The entire transfer system runs like a game of poker. To even sit at the poker table, you need to be able to afford the buy-in. This is the minimum amount of money that allows you to play. At poker games, the price of buy-in varies from game to game, so casinos in Las Vegas might charge exorbitant buy-ins, while local sport tournaments keep them reasonably moderate. And this is where the problems begin. It's obvious that to play in the big leagues, you need to be able to afford it. The same analogy holds for the smaller football clubs. Since they cannot afford to pay ridiculously high prices, the results of championships and leagues will always be skewed. And this is why Real Madrid and Arsenal are always at the top of their game.
The champions Manchester City retained their top spot, making €731 million in the last year.
This availability of financial resources skews sports results because obviously bigger clubs can get access to better players and far more lucrative deals. And the spirit of sporting competition is to reward accomplishment independently of capital. But the transfer system essentially threw that model down the drain.
I think this becomes a problem that UEFA need to face when English clubs go into Europe and start destroying, not just when they buy more players, but when they start destroying the opposition on the pitch.
And outcomes are all but assured. Clubs from smaller leagues find it's more difficult to qualify for the quarterfinals of UEFA Champions League than before. And so players from not so popular clubs remain obscure despite their bargaining talent. England, Italy and Spain hold the best clubs, while the rest have been overlooked. And for the better part of 2 decades that has been the case.
That's because City stand accused of over 100 breaches of the Premier League's financial rules.
The game is rigged against them. And perhaps the best example of this was Jean-Marc Bosman, a Belgian player who played for RFC League. In 1990, Bosman's contract with RFC League expired, and he wanted to move to the French club Dunkirk to expand his career. And the only problem was that RFC League demanded a transfer fee that Dunkirk was unwilling to pay. And as a result, Bosman could not move to Dunkirk and was effectively stuck at RFC League. To add insult to injury, Bosman's wages were reduced by 70% as he was no longer a first-team player. So unless kids like Andrew can make it to better league, no matter their talent, they will never be able to escape the bubble that the transfer system has confined them to. Unless a transfer agent would not want to take advantage of his situation and invest in the career of this kid. And this investor or transfer agent will be just one shark in the bloody ocean that players have to contend with. There are bigger sharks in the world of football. Essentially, a third-party investors hold the economic rights to a player. Investors cover the cost of a player's training and accommodation in return for a percentage of their future transfer fee. So much like the transfer agents, these third-party investors make their money almost exclusively from transfer deals. But why that's such a problem? Doesn't this mean Andrew will get better training, better sponsors and a chance to go big? Well, firstly, since these investors have a share in the player's career, they also get to have a say in the way that he is represented in the broader football world. This gives them a certain degree of authority over the lives and professional careers of these men. To put it bluntly, they own them to a certain degree. And the fact that most third-party investors are well-known conglomerates run by wealthy investors like the Creative Artists Agency means they will always be in it for the money. This can put them at odds with players and clubs since all of their decisions will be based what can make them the most money, not what is the best for player or team. And I agree that it's the right of these investors to seek out a profit. We can't blame them for that. But when they have complete disregard for players' well-being or their financial security, this is when it's not a fair game. Yes, I understand you are an investor and sometimes you make bad choices and invest in the wrong people. I agree. but that doesn't mean you can bend them to your will. And this hounding after gold creates a conflict of interest between the club, the player, and the third-party owner. A good example of this was when in 2015 the third-party ownership of Argentina player Dario Benedetto led to a conflict between Boca Juniors and its investors. The club refused to sell the player to another team, causing investors to take the legal action. And this brought the player's career to stand still as he was dragged through the swamp of legal proceedings. This is not the first time something like this has happened either.
We're talking about we see just the 1% of the big transfers, but the 99% of the players, they work their, I can't say the bad word, they work their A off, to try to improve their career and everything, but it's sometimes it stagnates also in lower categories,
9 times out of 10, players don't make their own decision. They're influenced by people. They're influenced by agents, they're influenced by family, they're influenced by clubs.
When other people make your freedom over the prospectus of your career, you're essentially a slave to their decisions. And our hero Andrew still doesn't fit in. He doesn't feel like he's at home doing what he loves. Because of all these legal disputes, player rights, all these transfers and shady deals, a player's life is not their own. The date was Saturday 15, October 2011. The scene was Liverpool versus Manchester United. As Suarez retrieved the ball from behind the goal, he then got into the positions to take the set piece. But during that instant, something has happened, and the referee immediately blew his whistle to stop play. It appeared that during his time, Suarez had exchanged a few unpleasant words with Patrice Evra, and he was found to have racially abused the defender. During the altercation, Suarez criticized Evra, literally saying, "Because you are n***."
Unfortunately for him, I speak Spanish, and I say, "What did you say?" And he said again, the N-word. I was like, all the kids are watching this game.
And our last case is the worst of all scenes of football nowadays. What happens when you get to play the sport of your dreams and get to be on the team that you dream of, but you are still unable to fit in? When the only thing holding you back is people's prejudice. And the only thing holding you back is the color of your own skin.
When we say racism, we talk about what? Just the color, the religion, is many things about the racism. And I know we try to use the football to make sure, to send a strong message to the world, but it's about the society. Outside, it will be the same, and it's about the education.
Unfortunately, racism is a sad reality on the pitch, and after overcoming all obstacles, this is probably the least nail in the coffin for someone like Lamar, our last hero. The fallout from their racist comments can be so severe that players withdraw from the field entirely. This is fair, considering no one likes to stay where they aren't welcome.
Monkey chants and people spitting at me when I was taking a throw-in or a corner kick.
Last season there was an 8-year high in disorder, with over 2,000 arrests. Throwing missiles, hate crimes, pitch invasions, all of them rose dramatically after lockdown.
Unlike how the majority of the corruption that happens in football institutions usually comes about in third world democracies like Africa or South America, it's sad to see that the most of the racist crowds and players hail from some of the most developed countries of the world, where people think that the progressive ideologies have kicked racism out of the field. And the worst incidents of racism come from none other than the UK, where star players from the Caribbean were often taunted and sometimes even physically harassed. So how did English football get so bad? Why is there so much inherent racism in one of the most forward-thinking countries in the world? I think the answer we can find in a history. There is one lesson of history I want to tell you. After World War II, newly nationalized public services such as the British Rail, the National Health Service and London Transport needed cheap labor. And to that end, they ended up recruiting workers from Jamaica, Barbados and Trinidad. because the people there were in a desperate need of employment, and besides, their living conditions in their home countries weren't the best, especially after the war. And with so many people looking to escape and to find new lives, and England on the prowl for cheap labor, it became a no-brainer for them to send the ships to bring back workers. And you know, the first arrivals was pretty small, like a 500 Jamaicans in 1949. This was just the beginning, and by the next few years there were around 250,000 Afro-American immigrants who had settled permanently in the UK.
Between 1948 through to the late 60s, more than 500,000 people came to the UK from the Caribbean. It was the first wave of Commonwealth immigration.
But the majority of local population saw them as foreigners coming in their lands and taking up their work with impunity. And the late 1950s through the late 1980s saw a number of mass street conflicts involving young Afro-Caribbean men and British police officers in English cities.
This is all that remains of the three-story house where nearly 100 young West Indians were celebrating at an all-night birthday party for two young friends.
Children have been burnt. That is what I once said.
You can already see where this is going and what it has with the football. The immigrants didn't speak English or share any of the traditions or values of the native population. What they did have was football. Just like jazz tied together expatriates in the bars of New Orleans, football became the sole cultural binder between the English and the Caribbean immigrants. And the real troubles began when these players of color appeared on national teams and competed on the field. The locals wouldn't have any of it. Football became the ultimate arena of this kind of discrimination, because for many Britons, football was a national sport, and outsiders were merely a stain to the glory of the sport. This is the era that saw the rise in the proverbial monkey chants. This was aimed at people of African descent to downplay their heritage. It would involve the crowd making monkey or ape noises as ethnic slurs. Besides that, hurling a banana at a black soccer player was commonplace in England in the 1980s, and unfortunately it's still very prevalent in the world of football.
You actually would walk off?
Yeah, well, why should I play? If you go on, it will never stop, because the people think like, okay, we will abuse the player, they will go inside, or we will stop a little bit, but they will come outside again, they will play the game.
And while you can become the best at what you do, you cannot control the way people react to you. This is Lamar's predicament. And despite being the best and receiving recognition for it, he still feels like an unwelcome visitor on the playing field. And well, now you may think that this is all a thing of the past and that all people in the sport and the crowd know better than to hurl racist insult at players.
Vandalised by racists, put right today by the British public.
Well, no. If history has taught us anything, people don't change. There has always been tension between white and black football players, even if it goes unexpressed.
You're mentioning a white guy, you never say this white guy, you say these guys. Why when you mention a black guy, you have to say this black guy?
For example, Richarlison's goal put Brazil 2-1 in their match against Tunisia, and several objects were thrown at the Tottenham striker from the stands during their September 2022 match. And you may think that it was a normal way to react for fans. Maybe it was, until the moment when there came a banana that landed right at his feet. Because it wasn't just a banana, it was an invitation to war. And after years of trying to snuff out anti-racial sentiment, we are still bombarded with the instances of bigotry like this. And you know, it's not just the fans either that people like Lamar will have to contend with. And you remember the case of Suarez. While Suarez tried to clear up the ambiguity in the statement, and there was much debate about the dialogue exchanged between the two players that a day.
Cada cultura tiene su forma de hablar, su forma diferente y por eso es totalmente diferente a cómo se explica en Inglaterra, cómo se explica en Uruguay o en España, ¿no?
In its aftermath, Suarez was banned for 8 matches and given a £50,000 £100 fine. Wherever Suarez said or meant with his words, we may never know, but one thing is for certain. Racism is still very much a part of the game, as it was back in the 70s. These days, FIFA has implemented several programs to eliminate racism from the field, throughout initiatives like the Kick It Out program. Still, it cannot target the crowds and players' sentimental beliefs, but it can take a stance. But is it enough for a football kid like Lamar to feel safe? This is a misfortune of Lamar. Despite having everything, despite being the best, he cannot get the clarity and peace it comes from being a part of the game. He will always be threatened as an outsider, not only by those on the pitch, but also by the people in the stands. It may never stop.
I said it last time I was on it, he's the best football player in the world. I don't know why he's laughing for. Chris, why are you laughing for? Why are you laughing for? I'm being serious. I'm being serious.
There is no passion, there is no vision, there is no aggression, there is no fucking mindset in this football club.
David De Gea could save the fucking Titanic. For fuck's sake, man.
So, what is football? Is it a political tool for corruption? An exploitative system of manipulation, or a reason to promote hate? Or it's just the best game in the world? Despite being a sport loved by billions and having a multi-billion-dollar budget, football is stricken by virulent cancer. Cancer that will eventually can kill football. Football means different things to different people. But at the end of the day, it's meant to be a way of unity and connection. Football was institutionalized so that millions of people who played the sport could compete and have fun, and that is the only idea worth defending. And if you take this noble idea away, all you're left with is a soulless competition or a dog fight. And any way you look at it, Nathaniel, Andrew and Lamar will be all caught in that dog fight. But there is a hope. Anyone that is deeply passionate about football carries that hope. Every child that dreams of becoming one of the greats carries that hope. Football is more than a game. For billions, it's an idea and a sense of life.